The Ed Sullivan Show airs for the very last time June 6, 1971 Sunday nights, 8 p.m., CBS. Ask almost any American born in the 1950s or earlier what television program ran in that time slot on that network, and they'll probably know the answer: The Ed Sullivan Show. For more than 2 decades, Sullivan's variety show was the premier television showcase for entertainers of all stripes, including Borscht Belt comedians, plate-spinning vaudeville throwbacks and, most significantly, some of the biggest and most current names in rock and roll. 23 years after its 1948 premiere, The Ed Sullivan Show had its final broadcast on this day in 1971. In its first 8 years of existence, there was no such thing as rock and roll to be featured on the program, originally called Toast of the Town. Yet even its first broadcast made music history when Broadway composers Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II gave the world its first taste of the score from their upcoming musical, South Pacific. Over the years, live performances of new and current Broadway shows were featured regularly on Ed Sullivan, including Julie Andrews singing "Oh Wouldn't It Be Lovely?" from My Fair Lady and Richard Burton singing "Oh What Do the Simple Folk Do?" from Camelot. Classical and opera performers also made frequent appearances, but of course The Ed Sullivan Show is now remembered most for providing so many iconic moments in the history of televised rock and roll. Elvis Presley's first appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show, in September 1956, was actually one of his most restrained and least thrilling. It was notable, however, given Ed Sullivan's assertion earlier that year that he'd never allow the King on his show. By the time the Beatles rolled around, Sullivan was far more comfortable with the hysteria young Elvis had caused. In fact, it was Ed Sullivan personally witnessing Beatlemania up close at London's Heathrow Airport in 1963 that led the Beatles being booked for their historic February 1964 American television debut. Through the rest of the 60s, The Ed Sullivan Show continued to host the day's biggest rock acts: the Rolling Stones, the Supremes, the Doors, the Mamas and the Papas, Janis Joplin and more. Gladys Knight and the Pips were the musical guests on the final episode of The Ed Sullivan Show, which was cancelled shortly after its rerun broadcast on this day in 1971.